Welcome to the Moms Rising Community Zoom. We'll be starting in just a moment. We're letting people into the Zoom right now. If you are joining, welcome to the Moms Rising Community Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us. Speaking of joining us, please let us know where you are as you come in the chat by putting your first name and your city in the chat. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. We're just letting people come into the Zoom for a bit, so we're going to be talking sort of about instructions for a moment. And so those instructions include, as you come in, please put your first name and your city in the chat so that we can show how big, how broad, how powerful our movement is together, and we can all see one another and where we're coming from. Thank you for joining us. And now I have a repeat of the message because I see the number of participants is rising. So if you have just joined us, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Moms Rising Community Zoom. We're inviting people to please put their first name and their city and state in the chat so we can see how big, powerful, bold, and spectacular we are as a movement together. And we can be in community tonight and, honestly, every day. So welcome, welcome. We still see that number going up fast as people are joining in and coming into the Moms Rising Community Zoom. We had over 3,900 RSVPs today, you all. So this number is going to keep rising. But welcome, welcome, welcome. And as you may have heard me say already, please put your first name and your city and state into the chat so we know who we are, where we are, what's going on. We can be in community. And I saw a quick question pass by the chat that I will just take a moment to answer. It said, do you have to be a mom to be a part of Moms Rising? The answer is you can be a mom, or you can love a mom, or you can be someone who's ever had a mom. Basically, if you're somebody with a belly button, you can be part of Moms Rising. So welcome to everyone. So thank you so much for tuning in to our Moms Rising Community Zoom. Please put your name and your city and state, first name and city and state in the chat so we can all hang out together and see where we are. I love seeing all the different places showing how broad and wide and powerful this movement is. By the way, we're in every state in the nation, you all. Every state in the nation has Moms Rising members. So thank you for joining from every state in the nation too. I see a lot of those states popping up and it's so exciting. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we're just going to let a few more people come in because we see the participant number still rising really quickly. So will you be able to see the recording? Yes, we're answering questions. The recording will be up on YouTube. We're also live streaming on YouTube. So you can watch us double if you want, or you can watch us later. You can fast forward through this part. I strongly suggest fast forwarding through me talking about this. But welcome to the people who have just come on to the community Zoom. We're still letting people into the room. Hello, thank you for joining us. And we are putting our first names and our city and state into the chat so we can all see each other, be together, see where we are, look at how bold and beautiful and powerful we are as a movement. It's pretty awesome. Thank you for joining us tonight. We know you have a lot of things that you can do. So I'm still seeing people come in pretty quickly, but we're going to start into what's happening and start into this agenda today. So first, as we start, the most important thing is to talk about interpretation services. So I'd like to introduce Angie to share the interpretation instructions.
Thank you so much. Yes, welcome to everybody. Bienvenidos. We are providing interpretation into Spanish, so you prefer to listen to this wonderful meeting in Spanish. The instructions are in the chat. I will put them again. And please bear with me for 1 second while I make this announcement in Spanish. Hola, bienvenidas a todos. Espero que estén teniendo un gran día. Por favor, conéctense a la interpretación si prefieren escuchar en español. Las instrucciones están en el chat, pero básicamente puede ir a los 3 botoncitos para ir a interpretación, escoger español y así poder escuchar esta sesión en español. Muchas gracias. Cualquier pregunta nos dejan saber en el chat y que tengan una gran sesión. I've made the announcements in Spanish. I will repost the instructions in the chat for folks to have. And I hope you have a great meeting with Mamás con Poder, Moms Rising. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Angie. And while we're saying thank you, I'd like to thank Olivia, Catalina, Geronimo, and the Moms Rising team for helping to make this happen tonight. Let's give them some hearts. And as we're talking about hearts, please feel free to use the heart function and any other little emojis that you can find, as well as to put comments in the chat along the way and to express yourself as we are doing this meeting together. And we also want to let you know that there is a Q&A function that people can use. It's at the bottom of the screen. You see the little Q&A. We are welcoming questions in that Q&A section, and then we'll have a moment after the panelists to answer them together, but we'll also try to answer them as we go in writing as if we see them. So use the chat, use the emojis, use the question and answer. We're going to have like a full roundabout experience here tonight with presentations, including with you. So now we are going to begin. And for those who just came, please put your first name and your city and state in the chat. But we're going to begin. And we're going to begin by just sort of centering in where we are right now. And where we are right now is in a place where the headlines have been bleak, the headlines have been chaotic, the headlines have been hard to understand, and they're fast moving. But what's not hard to understand and what's hopeful is the power that we're building together. In fact, the power that we're building together is quite honestly hope in motion. Moms Rising has grown by several 100,000 people just in the past several weeks alone. We are now 1.2 million active members in the United States of America. That means 1 in 300 people are actually active members of Moms Rising. So all of us who are on here tonight are not alone. We're in an organization and a movement and in a time where we're building hope together today. Now, when we're talking about hope, I want to share some more hope. Another thing that brings me hope is that over 2,950 people, many of you, are delivering books of moms' experiences with healthcare, childcare, Head Start, SNAP, and nutrition, and K through 12 directly to members of Congress in their districts these weeks. So thank you to those who are delivering. Together, we're unstoppable, and we have delivered storybooks to every single member of Congress at this point. We want to keep them going. The second thing that's really exciting is the proof that what we're doing is working. We've seen a proof point that 12 House Republicans recently wrote a letter saying they were concerned about cuts to Medicaid. We only need 3 in the House to hold the line. Our work isn't done yet, but that momentum is because of people like me, you, and us together reaching out across the aisle to Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, Green Party, and saying, hey, everybody gets sick, everybody needs a chance to get better, and you are being heard. So you, me, and us are powerful together. And speaking of power, to fire us up today, we have 3 amazing experts who are here to share what's happening inside the Beltway. And we'll have time for your questions at the end. We're going to cover what's at stake with the tax and budget proposal, including cuts to Medicaid and Social Security, cuts to Head Start and childcare. Then we're also going to cover something that is really disastrous that's happening, voting rights problems. We have a SAVE Act, which does nothing to save our voting rights. It does the exact opposite moving through Congress right now. We're going to find out about it. As we find out about these things and throughout our community Zoom, we're not going to wallow in despair, although this is despairing. We're going to rise to action. We'll be putting some actions in the chat box. We'll also talk about some actions at the end, and we'll send you a follow-up email that also has the actions in them. So we're going to learn and we're going to act, because what we learn about is going to be a little bit overwhelming and sad, but we know that together our voices are unstoppable and powerful, and we have some actions for you to take that will help build that power. So without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce the amazing Amy Matsui, who is the Senior Director of Income Security at the National Women's Law Center, an organization Moms Rising loves. She leads the center's work on a broad range of economic issues affecting low and moderate income women and families, including, importantly, federal tax policy, public benefits programs, gender and racial wealth gaps, and women's retirement security. Her work comprises policy analysis, administrative and legislative advocacy, and public education and outreach with the goal of increasing gender, racial, and economic equity. She's written numerous reports and articles on women's economic security, testified in Congress and federal agencies, and she is often a featured expert in the media and in our own Zoom. Welcome, Amy, to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for that warm introduction. And I so appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. As Kristen said, I'm going to talk about where we are with the Republican budget. and I have some slides. So while they're coming up, this budget advances the Trump administration's extreme pro-billionaire, anti-family agenda. It is going to mean unprecedented cuts to programs that women and families rely on to meet basic needs, all to give more tax cuts to billionaires. Next slide, please. So right now, Congress is in the middle of budget reconciliation. What this means is that because Republicans control the House, Senate, and White House, they're using a special legislative procedure that allows Congress to move this tax and spending bill forward more quickly and easily. So first, the House and Senate had to pass basically a budget blueprint. It outlined how much they would increase the deficit, and it told the different committees how much their part of the legislation will either cost or save. Each chamber passed their budget resolution in March. Now they're at the point where they're going to start working on their legislative text. We're expecting committees in the House to start releasing and marking up their bills starting around May 7th. The House is most likely going to vote on their whole budget package the week of May 19th, although that could slip. This is consistent with what House Majority Leader Johnson has been saying about wanting a vote before the Memorial Day recess. On the other hand, the Senate is expected to basically write its bills behind closed doors. They're going to be working on the bills we expect in May and June, but again, this timeline could slip. So once the House and Senate have each voted on their own bills, they have to get together and reconcile them. Both chambers have to vote on the exact same reconciliation bill, and if that passes, it goes to the president to sign. When is this going to happen? It could happen before August. It could happen after August, but we definitely expect this to happen by the end of the year. Next slide, please. So the $600,000 question, or more accurately, the $4.5 trillion question, is what is going to be in the budget reconciliation package. Even though we don't have text yet, we have a pretty good idea of what's going to be in the bill. And that's because the Republicans' two priorities are, one, giving even more tax cuts away to billionaires, and two, cutting programs and services that women and families rely on to pay for them. So here's what they want to do on the tax side. Some temporary tax provisions that were enacted in 2017 expire in December. So the Republicans want to extend them and possibly make them permanent. The 2017 tax law overwhelmingly benefited the top. Just to give you an idea, in 2025, the average tax cut for the top 1% is over $61,000. While the average tax cut for the bottom 20% is only $70. So on top of these expiring tax cuts, there are additional tax cuts that President Trump has been pushing, which would make the tax portion of the bill even more expensive, and they are also skewed towards the very top. And just to note, the Republicans want these tax cuts so much that Senate Republicans have basically invented some magic math to make it seem like the tax cuts won't cost a dime. But we know better. Next slide. And in fact, to help pay for the new tax breaks for billionaires and big corporations, the Republican budget package is going to make huge cuts to programs that workers and families rely on. So as I mentioned, the House budget resolution, just to walk through that, told committees how much they want them to cut in spending, or in the case of the Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over taxes, how much they have to spend. So the huge numbers that you see on the screen actually mean big cuts for everyday families. A memo that was leaked from the House Budget Committee in January shows that they're really looking to cut programs like SNAP and Medicaid as much and in as many ways as they can get away with. Just as an example, the Republican proposals to cut SNAP could reduce food assistance for 40 million people. They would also take food assistance away from people in areas with insufficient jobs, older adults, parents of school-aged children, veterans, people experiencing homelessness, and youth who have aged out of foster care. And cutting Medicaid as much as the budget resolution proposes means taking health care, prenatal care, mental health services away from millions of people across the country. On top of that, as you know, Medicaid covers almost 40% of births, and it's the largest source of funding for long-term care for aging and disabled people. The leaked memo also showed that Republicans are thinking about significant cuts to temporary assistance for needy families, or TANF, and the Social Services Block Grant, under which states can shift funds for child care assistance. And if they make these cuts, an estimated 40,000 children would lose childcare and millions more would be impacted. As I know we're going to talk about later, we're expecting other cuts to programs like Head Start, higher education, school meals from other committees. Next slide, please. So very soon, we're going to see what cuts are actually proposed. But I think there is no scenario in which the Republican budget does not hurt families dramatically. So for example, you saw the numbers on the last slide, and even though Republicans have been saying that they're not really going to cut people's SNAP and Medicaid benefits, the truth is that they can't cut this much without doing so. And the impact of cuts of this magnitude will go far beyond individual families. Federal SNAP and Medicaid funds are a huge portion of state budgets. And if the federal funding sources are eliminated, then states are going to get squeezed. And that means that other essential programs and services across the board will be at risk. Next slide. So I also want to point out, this is a little doom and gloom, but I'm just trying to give the full picture, that these cuts aren't just existing in isolation. They also come in the context of what's happening in the rest of the economy, in part as a result of the Trump administration's recent actions. So we know we're seeing $8 eggs in the grocery store, care costs continue to rise, housing costs are, excuse the pun, through the roof. But then if you freeze federal funding and fire federal workers, you're going to undermine basic need programs like SNAP and TANF and Medicaid even more. And if you tank the economy, you're going to put families in even greater need of help to afford the basics. Next slide. So just to summarize, the Republican budget is going to raise costs for families who absolutely do not have a penny to spare, just to give more tax cuts to billionaires. But just to remind everybody, like Kristen said, there is still hope this is not a done deal. People have been speaking up around the country about how these cuts would impact them and their families, and Republicans are starting to pay attention. So you all have heard about town halls where people are saying, don't take my health care, don't take my food, don't take, food meals out of schools. And Kristen also mentioned the letter that was signed by Republican House members last week saying that they're not in favor of Medicaid cuts in the final bill. And I'm pretty sure there are more out there who didn't sign the letter. So what does that mean? The more we can keep up the pressure, the better our chances are at influencing the bill, delaying the bill, and really limiting the harm for families. Next slide. So right now, this is a really crucial time to communicate to your member of Congress, tell them to prioritize families over billionaires and say no to this disastrous budget bill. They haven't got the final text out there. They need to hear our voices. And I really appreciate the chance to pass along that message and talk to you today. And I will turn it back to you, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Amy. We will have access to resources in the email that comes in following this meeting. I want to thank Amy for sharing with us, but also for fighting for us in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill each and every day. Thank you so much, Amy. Please take a look at the actions also in the chat box and take action with the National Women's Law Center as well. So thank you, Amy. We have our next exciting, spectacular, depressing, but uplifting speaker who's going to tell us all the ways that early childhood policy, childcare, and Head Start are under attack. And we're also going to talk about how we can fight back. And that's the important part, people. We are still in fighting mode. We have won policy fights that nobody thought we'd be able to win in the past, and we're going to win again because we're all in this together. So without further ado, I want to introduce Katie Ham. She's a nationally recognized expert in early childhood policy with over 20 years of experience in the federal government and national advocacy. She's currently a visiting professor at the Erickson Institute, where her work focuses on the intersection of policy and research and supports state and local organizations as they navigate the federal landscape. She served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Education for Early Childhood Development at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services during the Biden administration, overseeing $25 billion in federal early childhood funds, including Head Start and Child Care and the Child Care Development Fund. During her time at ACF, she played a critical role in developing policies to increase early educator pay, yes, and to make early care and education programs more accessible and affordable to families, yes. Previously, she was Vice President for Early Childhood Policy at the Center for American Progress, where she led groundbreaking work on child care affordability and supply and created the foundational policy for what ultimately became President Biden's Build Back Better plan, which, by the way, against all odds, passed the U.S. House and only failed by one vote in the U.S. Senate, which means it's time for us to go back again for that policy when we get a president who's with us. So without further ado, we present the expert, the amazing, the spectacular, Super Katie Ham. Katie, to you.
Kristen, thank you for that very enthusiastic and warm welcome. It's great to be with you all. Thank you to Moms Rising for convening this important meeting and having me on. Thanks to all of you for joining. I know most of you are moms and have a lot on your plate. And the fact that you're taking time tonight to really engage says so much about your values and the power of this movement. If we could bring up the slides. So I'm going to talk today mostly about the Head Start program. Head Start is an early childhood program serving children from birth until they go to kindergarten in 20,000 locations across the country. So there is likely a Head Start in your neighborhood. There is Head Start in every congressional district across the country. And it's a critically important program serving children who are furthest from opportunity. Most children who are enrolled in Head Start are in households where the income is below the federal poverty level. And Head Start is not just an early education program, it also provides really important services like developmental screenings and referrals for children who have developmental delays or disabilities, provides mental health care, dental care, family support, building on family strengths, helping parents improve their financial situation. Head Start has been around for a long time. It's a 60-year-old program, incredibly successful, which is how it has stood the test of time. I was telling someone recently, every 20 years, there's an existential threat to Head Start, and we rise up and we fight and we save the program, and we're going to do that again. And it's really going to take all of us working together. The best way I can explain what's going on in Head Start now is like a game of whack-a-mole. And program directors are feeling this day in and day out. They are the people who are in charge of implementing these services, and they are struggling. It is one thing after another. So it started with payment freezes back in February, where people would go to draw down the funds that they were already awarded that were supposed to be available to them, and they found they couldn't access them. And if they can't make payroll, they can't stay open. Grants are delayed. So grants are 3, 4, 7, 8, 9 weeks late. And that's the case even though Congress already passed a full year extension, a full year spending bill. So Congress or the administration kind of keeps playing with these grants in a way that's making it really hard for program directors to administer the Head Start program. It's creating a lot of stress and anxiety. They don't know if they're going to be able to get their funding when they go to draw down their funds. There was DEI guidance basically telling Head Start programs that they couldn't do anything related to DEI. It was really designed to I think as a scare tactic because it wasn't defined. It was just saying you can't do this, even though the Head Start Act itself says things like you have to have inclusive classrooms for children with disabilities. You need to Meet families where they are. You need to provide instruction in the child's home language. All things that we know are really good for children and families that are reflected in the Head Start Act. And this guidance really stands in contradiction to that. And then in the beginning of the month, it seems like more than 3 weeks ago, all of a sudden on a Tuesday, Head Start federal staff, so people who work in the Office of Head Start, went to work and some of their badges didn't work. And their badges didn't work because overnight, the secretary had decided to close half of the regional offices. I said earlier that Head Start is a program that exists in 20,000 locations across the country. It is federal to local. So those people in those 5 regional offices that were shut down overnight cover 22 states. They are the people delivering the grants. They are the people helping and partnering with those program directors to implement the Head Start program. So now, as people are seeing this guidance and they are dealing with payment freezes and grant delays, they also have no one to call. They have the generic inbox instead of a person that they had a relationship with that was partnering with them on Head Start. They're also getting Doge emailed when they go to draw down their funds. There's another email that says, justify your spending. These are people who have budgets that have already been reviewed and approved, and they've gotten their grants. And so then last week, we see through a USA Today news article, a leaked budget document indicated that the Trump administration plans to propose eliminating the program in the next fiscal year. So when we connect all these dots, we see where this is going. They want to eliminate the program. They know it's popular with Congress and that that's going to be an uphill battle. And so there's this death by 1,000 cuts attempt in this year's funding. So if we want to go to the next slide, we have a big fight ahead of us for the next year for FY26, the funds that we think the Trump administration will propose zeroing out. But we also have a fight this year, and we have impacts that are already happening. So I've been talking to Head Start administrators across the country. They are stressed, they are burned out. And instead of focusing on providing services to children and families, they're on the phone trying to find their funding and trying to draw down their funding and stressing about staying open. A provider today said she can't call her teachers back from spring break because she doesn't have enough money in the bank to pay them. So she's trying to figure out if she can reopen on Monday. That is incredibly stressful. It's a lot to carry when you're already providing services in your community. Teachers and staff, these are people who do amazing work. They are not paid what they should be paid. And we ask so much of them. And now we can't even give them job security. They read the news, they read the headlines, they know that this program is under attack. And we really risk them leaving for other jobs. And we want to keep them in Head Start, where our goal is really to provide the best that we have in early care and education to children furthest from opportunity. Families, a lot of families use Head Start as their childcare. If they lose their childcare, I don't think I had to tell this group, they can't go to work, they can't put food on their family's table. And they face higher childcare costs if they have to go and find alternative childcare. Head Start is provided to families at no cost to them. And if they can't find childcare and they leave their jobs, they lose income. And for many families, especially those in rural areas, there's not another option, even if they could afford it. Head Start is pretty much it. And most importantly, children stand to lose access to early care and education or disruptions. We had a program that closed, I think last week for 3 or 4 days, and that's disruptive to children. It disrupts their relationships with their caregivers and their teachers. It disrupts their learning and their family's schedule, which is not good. The other thing I will add is I'm also starting to hear the Head Start programs are not renewing with vendors because they don't know if they're going to get their funding. They are skipping maintenance or skipping some services because they can't afford it. Head Start is an important contributor to the economy in a lot of communities. And so if construction projects or building maintenance is delayed, those are small businesses in the community that are losing contracts or they're losing income as well. So it's not just the people who are directly enrolled in Head Start, it's others as well. If we want to go to the next slide. So before I wrap up, I want to mention the important role that Head Start plays in communities as a whole. Hi, this is my son. He's joined me. Can you please go? So Head Start is a major part of the budget for a lot of early care and education programs. So there might be some Head Start classrooms, as well as private pay classrooms, preschool classrooms. But without that Head Start money, they can't pay for their facility, they can't pay their rent. So the whole business model comes crashing down if Head Start isn't there. Head Start is also a pillar for a lot of other human services programs like community action agencies. And again, if you don't have the Head Start piece of your budget, you can't afford to continue operating. So those other services are. And I think we should be advocating for Head Start on its own merits, but it's also important to remember that it's not just the children and families enrolled in Head Start that stand to lose. A lot of states and school districts and local communities are investing in preschool and childcare, and they're able to offer that broadly to a lot of children in the community because Head Start is footing the bill for so many other children. If Head Start isn't there, then that means those local dollars and those state dollars get stretched incredibly thin and aren't able to serve all of the children that they are serving. And last but not least, I think it's important to talk about how Head Start promotes economic growth. It is providing jobs in communities, especially in areas where there is not as much economic activity. It's supporting families and improving their own financial situation and maintaining employment. So it's about Head Start and the program and the promise to these children, but there will also be rippling effects across communities if Head Start isn't maintained. So as I said at the beginning, as Kristen has said several times, I believe that we can fight this. I believe that we will win. I believe that if we move away from this behind the scenes, death by 1,000 cuts mentality that the administration is trying to take, we can have a public fight about Head Start and we will win. It's going to take all of us standing up and defending the program. Now that the administration has put their budget out there, intentionally or not, I think it's important that we are all standing up for Head Start and indicating that we will not tolerate cuts, let alone elimination to the program. So I will wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Kristen. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. And I fully agree that when we fight, we win. I wish we were in a rally together so we could say, when we fight, and you would say, we win. When we fight, we win, because it's true. We have lots of examples of this through past history, both at the state level and at the federal level. One example is during Donald Trump's first term in office. Donald Trump wanted to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which covers 30 million people's health care. The House Republican leadership wanted to get rid of it, and the Senate Republican leadership wanted to get rid of it. And they looked up and they looked around and they looked at all of us, moms, dads, parents, and people, and they said, you are not strong enough to save the Affordable Care Act. Well, guess what? They tried to overturn the Affordable Care Act 52 times. And we won 52 times, you all, because we stood together, we shared our stories, we didn't give up, we treated the moment like a marathon, not a sprint, and we relied on each other. So we're in this movement and moment again where we can't give up. And we're going to hear more right now about not giving up on democracy, because democracy is what makes our country work. So I want to give a giant thank you to Katie. Let's give her some hearts. Let's give her some love. Let's give Katie some thanks, because that was really important. Obviously, we need the care infrastructure so parents can go to work, kids can learn, and care workers can stay in their profession because they earn a living wage. And all of that is what makes the work of everything possible. 86% of women have kids by the time they're 44 years old. So this is not a small number of people who need childcare. So thank you, Katie, for saving childcare. Speaking of saving things, we have a very terrible, awful, and bad bill out there right now that's actually called the SAVE Act. The bill title is not that bad. The bill contents is horrible. And we have Greta Bedovic, who is here with us today to share what's happening, how we can take action, and how we can rise to protect our democracy. She's the Associate Director of Democracy Policy at American Progress. Prior to joining American Progress, she worked on Capitol Hill as a policy advisor to the U.S. Senate Committee on Rules and Administration for the amazing Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. She's also a policy advisor to that committee, and as a policy advisor for that committee, she worked extensively on voting rights, election security and administration, and democracy legislation, including, and importantly, the Freedom to Vote Act and the For People Act. Prior to working in the U.S. Senate, she worked on federal and state campaigns, completed a fellowship at a non-governmental organization based in Nairobi, Kenya, and concluded an ethnographic research for a democratic decision-making app project based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We are talking about a Renaissance person here, people. So thank you so much, and I pass the mic to you, Greta.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kristen. And I saw people share in the chat too that are from Minnesota. So big shout out to all those people. My mom is also in Minnesota. I'm very happy to be here today talking to you all about this. I know many of you have probably heard about the SAVE Act. A lot of moms have been talking about the SAVE Act. So let's dive into it and see who would be the most affected. So Jerome, if we can get the slides. Great. So like Kristen already alluded, the SAVE Act is really a huge misnomer. It's called the Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility Act. But once we dive into it, we'll really see how many millions of American citizens are going to be disenfranchised by this. So next slide, please. So at its core, the SAVE Act would really add a lot of red tape to how every single American citizen registers to vote. If you went to your current election website right now, or if you went in person to your election office, you could register to vote simply by using your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. But if the SAVE Act were passed, you'd be required to show documentary proof of your citizenship in person to your election official at your election office. And so for most people, that means you'd either have to use your passport or your birth certificate. And it's really critical to recognize that when you register to vote, it's not just the first time you go to a state, right? So if I moved to Minnesota, I'd have to re-register to vote there. But also if I got married and I changed my name, or if I moved across the street, those are also all voter registration updates. So it's not just one time that Americans are going to be doing this. People are going to be doing this throughout the course of their life. So the SAVE Act is disguised as an election integrity bill. It claims to be about stopping non-citizens from voting. What we're really going to see is it's actually going to stop eligible American citizens from accessing the ballot box, and that's why we're really concerned about this. Next slide, please. Great. So other forms of documents that Americans could show. So if you're a naturalized citizen, you could also show a naturalization certificate. If you're in the military, you could show military ID, but that would have to be accompanied by a record of service because military IDs inherently do not indicate your citizenship status. Similarly, most tribal IDs also do not actually indicate your citizenship status. So most people would also have to show that with a birth certificate. And then we've seen a lot of disinformation around a provision of the bill that says that you could show your real ID. But the bill specifically states that you could show your real ID as long as it actually indicates that you are a United States citizen. And I can virtually guarantee you that if you go and check your real ID, it says nothing about your citizenship status. Because the star on your real ID or anything like that indicates that you've shown documentation proving that you're allowed to legally reside in the United States. That's what really the real ID protections are for. And they do not actually indicate citizenship status. So it's really a nothing burger in the bill that has caused a lot of confusion. You may have also seen on social media and some other articles that there are about 5 states that offer enhanced driver's licenses that actually do indicate citizenship status. Those licenses are basically like driving passport cards, and they're offered in states like Michigan, Minnesota, Vermont, and New York in order to cross the border. But for the vast majority of American citizens, your driver's license would not suffice, and you would be forced to either get a passport, update your passport, have a passport, or use your birth certificate. Next slide, please. And even for people who registered, the SAVE Act would completely overrule and upend the voter registration system as we know it. So because of that in-person element and you having to go to your election office and show documentation, systems that millions of us use, like online registration and mail-in registration, will be functionally eliminated. It would also completely upend registration at the DMV or your motor vehicle agency, because there aren't actually election officials there to look at your documentation, and that's what the bill requires. It would also make same-day registration very unreliable, because if you showed up to your polling location and tried to update your registration or register at the polls, if any one of your forms of documentation were not accepted, you would not be able to register to vote and you would not be able to cast a ballot. So that becomes completely unreliable, and we'll see how that's already played out in a state. And similarly, anything like voter registration drives on college campuses and community centers, those would also be functionally eliminated because there aren't actually election officials there to look at your documentation. Key part of the SAVE Act too is that it mandates ongoing voter roll purges. So even if you're a registered voter, if for some reason a state believes that you are not a citizen or you haven't shown the proper forms of documentation, or maybe your name looks suspicious to an election official, you could be taken off the voter rolls. And these are mandatory purges that have to be, on an ongoing basis. So we would see a lot of currently registered voters removed who would have to again show documentation in order to reaffirm their registration status. A lot of people also think that they're kind of exempt from this bill because they're already registered to vote. But in reality, we see that 80 million American citizens register to vote every federal election cycle. So that's people who are registering to vote either for the first time or making updates. 80 million people do that every 2 years. That's about 40% of all registered voters. So it's going to be huge swaths of the population that are affected by this every single federal election cycle. Next, please. Thank you. So some of the data that we've done this time for American Progress is kind of looking at segments of the population who are going to be the most impacted by this. So we looked at passport ownership, and then we looked at birth certificates, which is the issue that's going to affect a lot of moms here too. So look at passport ownership. We see that only about half of American adults possess a passport, and we see huge discrepancies state by state. So you can see that passport ownership on the left here is kind of concentrated in a lot of coastal Democratic states, and really it's southern and rural states where it's very low percent of passport ownership. It's like West Virginia, for example, the state with the lowest rate, only about 20% of citizens there actually have a passport. Very similarly in states like Alabama, Mississippi, only about 30% of citizens do. So it's really going to be, people in coastal and democratic areas who are the least affected by the passport requirement. When we look at the situation for a lot of women who have married and changed their name and now have their spouse's name, they're not going to have a birth certificate that matches the name that they're going to register to vote under. And this is where they're going to face a lot of problems, because the bill says the name that you are applying to register to vote under, so your current legal name, has to be the one listed on your birth certificate. And if that's not the case, there's not actually an established process in the bill for how to resolve that issue. What the bill basically says is that the states need to figure out what that process is going to look like. And that kind of opens the gateway for 50 states to do that 50 different ways. So in some states, it might be very easy. You might just be able to show your birth certificate, but that's not explicitly mentioned in the bill. But other states will make it quite a bit more difficult, and they might require you to, for example, show either a divorce decree in addition to your marriage certificate if you've been divorced, or name change documentation in addition to your marriage certificate. So it's really important that this process is not currently established, and why we're seeing a lot of women speak about this issue and voice their concerns. Next slide, please. So one of the key things to consider here is we don't really have to think about how this would play out for women, because we just saw recent New Hampshire local elections that were administered under a state law very similar to the SAVE Act. And despite marriage certificates being a way for married women to prove their identity, we still saw women disproportionately disenfranchised. So we saw some women having to come back to the polls as many as 3 times because they still didn't have the proper documentation with them to register to vote. So if you think about your situation, if you think about picking up your kids, coming home from work, all of those things, if you're going to the polls and you're going to register to vote, you're not going to have the opportunity to come back 3 times in a single day to update your registration. A lot of these local elections, it's people who are retired, people who are elderly who are voting and turning out in these local, off-year election cycles. But for a very large general federal election, people are not going to have the time to come back, 3 times. We also saw women who were just blatantly blocked in the ballot box because they no longer had their marriage certificates, right? But their husbands didn't have a problem casting their ballots. There's an instance of a woman who, had been married in Florida in the 1970s, and she's voting in New Hampshire because we're just starting to vote there. And she didn't have her marriage certificate, from 50 years ago at this point, issued by Florida. And so she was never allowed to be able to register to vote. She was not able to cast a ballot. And this is extremely extremely concerning and really should be seen as kind of a canary in the coal mine for what's going to happen to women's rights to vote if the SAVE Act did become federal law. One quote that really stuck with me from New Hampshire was from Betsy Spencer, who was a 70-year-old voter, and she said, "I had my birth certificate, a change of address from the U.S. Postal Service, everything but my blood type in the kitchen sink, and I was still told I could not register to vote." And very similarly, a local election official just blatantly said that this law is disenfranchising women. Next slide, please. We look at this on a national scale too. We've already seen that Kansas about a decade ago enacted a law very similar to the SAVE Act, and subsequently 31,000 eligible American citizens were blocked from the ballot box. There was no shown effect for how, non-citizen voting was, decreased or election integrity was made more secure. What we do know is that 31,000 eligible citizens were blocked from the ballot box, and ultimately this was overturned by the courts and has not been enforced since. Very similarly, Arizona currently has a law like this in place. And last election cycle, nearly 250,000 voters were blocked from the ballot box because they didn't have documentation or because of state errors around this law, which we very likely see in states across the country as well. They were able to vote like a week or 2 weeks out from the election. This was decided due to like last minute court decisions. And so it was really almost 240,000 voters who were blocked from the ballot box just a week out in a state which is very consequential presidential elections as well. This is currently still being litigated essentially, and there's tens of thousands of voters who've been ordered to go back to their election office and show documentation if they want to continue to remain on the voter registration list for the state. Next slide, please. So what we see from our national landscape is that it's really going to be low income and working class Americans who are predominantly affected. These are folks who are going to be less likely to possess the forms of documentation needed under the bill, and also less likely to be able to take time off. You might need to take a full day off in some instances, as I'll show you in just a minute, for being able to go to your county election office and wait in line to show your documentation. A lot of folks who work a 9-to-5 job are not going to be able to do that. We also see that women who have married and changed their name are going to face increased obstacles compared to their spouses and their husbands. Voters with disabilities are also going to face increased obstacles because voter registration methods that they rely on, like online registration, are not going to be available anymore. Victims of natural disasters who've lost their paperwork are also going to be disenfranchised. That's not just like a far out scenario. We saw, 2 major hurricanes last year, just a month out from the election cycle. We've also seen wildfires in Hawaii and California, and so we know people are going to be losing their documentation. Women who are also victims of domestic violence often flee without any forms of their documentation. They're just leaving. They're not going to have the documentation they need if they still want to be able to vote. Similarly, members of the military and overseas Americans, their fate is essentially up in the air under this bill because they're obviously not election officials who are posted abroad for them to be able to access. And many members of the military who are deployed and overseas and fighting in war zones do not have this documentation on hand with them. Similarly, Native American voters oftentimes don't have birth certificates that are acceptable, and rural voters are going to have to drive very long distances to get to their election office, as you'll see on the next slide, please. So we did a quick study at the Center for American Progress too, to kind of look at some of the most rural counties in the United States to see how far people would actually have to drive. So we looked at 30 counties, and these are just 2 of the examples of like the 10 or so maps that we did. But you can see that, for example, Mojave County in Arizona, you can see where the election office is on the left and where Colorado City, a town of 2,500 people, is. There's one county election office in this county. And so those folks would have to drive actually through Utah and Nevada in order to take the fastest route to get to their county election office, which is an 8-hour drive round trip because now they can't mail in their application and they can't do it online. And very similarly in Wyoming, you have Wyoming. Between that and the Powell City Election Hall, there's Yellowstone National Park. And so these folks will have to drive like halfway through Montana just to get back to their election office to register to vote. Next slide, please. So the current status of the SAVE Act. So the SAVE Act was passed by the House of Representatives about 2 weeks ago now. It received unanimous support from all Republicans and support from 4 Democrats as well. Next, we're going to see it taken up by the U.S. Senate, where it's led by Senator Mike Lee of Utah. There it's Senate Bill 128, and it currently has 22 Republican co-sponsors. We know it's very unlikely that the bill will receive the 60 votes that it needs to overcome the Senate filibuster, but this does not mean that it's dead on arrival in the Senate. Amy, for example, just talked about the Senate budget reconciliation process. And for a budget reconciliation bill, you only need 50 votes for that to pass. And so we are very concerned about attempts over the next coming weeks or month for Republicans to try and get this in through reconciliation and prove essentially the bill will have an impact on, the deficit or basically the national budget in order to get this in there, or further government funding bills. Last year, when President Trump was running for office, he basically called on Republicans to include the SAVE Act in government funding bills in order to kind of force people's hands. And so that's something that we're currently also worried about. And then we think there could be attempts to try and amend legislation to make it seem more reasonable, or to even completely substitute it with a different text but under the same title that will essentially do the same thing through a different lens. Next slide, please. The last thing I kind of want to touch on, which has gone a little bit under the radar, is that while a lot of people have been focused on the SAVE Act, President Trump actually signed an executive order on March 25th that would kind of unilaterally bypass Congress and his attempt to enact the SAVE Act. It would very similarly require Americans to show document of citizenship with a registration application. This is blatantly unconstitutional because the president has no authority to set federal election laws. It's only state and Congress who have that authority granted by the Constitution, and it's currently facing legal challenges. Just today, we found out that a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction kind of halting the implementation of the executive order as it pertains to citizenship documentation, but it's still going to be an ongoing legal challenge that we're watching. But it's really critical to know that under the executive order, it's really only a passport that Americans could use to prove their citizenship status. Birth certificates are not even explicitly mentioned in the executive order. And again, it mentions real IDs, but it requires them to indicate citizenship, something that, as we discussed, real IDs don't really do. So under this regime, Americans would really be required essentially to have a passport if they want to register to vote or update their registration information. Similarly, one kind of improvement, if we can call it, is that it seems like digital copies of documents could be permissible under the executive order. So it might save Americans a trip to the election office. But of course, if you don't have documentation to take a photo of or to scan, you're still going to be disenfranchised. It also charges the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, which gives federal election funding, to withhold that funding if states do not comply with the executive order. So that's kind of, the stick and the carrot there. And then very concerningly, it essentially also charges DOGE and Elon Musk with reviewing state voter registration lists and voter registration files, presumably to find people they think are not citizens and shouldn't be able to vote, but that's going to be up to Elon Musk under this. And so to end on a little bit more of a hopeful note, last slide, please. I just kind of want to outline, some action items for you. And I'm seeing the chat pop up a lot, and people are talking about the cost of passports. So before we get to this, it's important to note that it costs $165 for you to get a passport for the first time. It costs $135 to renew a passport. They're only valid for 10 years. So, if you're voting, for example, for like 60 years of your life, that's 6 passports you're going to go through. It's very blatantly a poll tax. Even if you just have to get a copy of your birth certificate or a copy of your marriage certificate, that's going to cost you about $30 each to get that from your county, so $60 total. So it's very clearly a poll tax, and there is no funding behind this bill to help any individuals or states cover costs associated with this. So it's really up to individual voters and states to do that. So some action items that you can do that we'd really encourage you to take up is please call your senator and tell them to focus on this. We've seen that it's passed the House, but senators are making their statements heard about this at this moment. We've already seen some key, especially Democratic senators, speak out on this issue, but they've never voted on this before. So many of them don't have a public stance on this. So please reach out to them and let them know that you oppose this bill. Please, again, post on social media and talk to your community and friends about it. I've heard from so many of my family members and extended family that in completely organic conversations, this bill is coming up. And that's generally not something we see in the voting rights space. It's kind of momentum behind these things. So please, keep those conversations going. If your member is hosting town halls, it would be great for you to go to those as well. We've seen some really viral moments and powerful statements too coming out of those. There was one woman who confronted her representative from Georgia about the SAVE Act and basically asked him to defend it and its impact on married women, and he was unable to do so, and said he'd have to go, revisit the bill or reread the bill to see what it would do. And so it's really important to make sure that members are having to stand up for these issues if they're going to vote on them and defend them, in a public forum. Very similarly, if you're attending any organizing events, please talk to people about this. Any of the hands-off movement stuff, make sure to save that as part of that conversation. And if you can, please do any letters to the editor or op-eds, because we're seeing, they were overwhelmingly against the bill for a very long time, but now we're seeing kind of, conservatives and Republicans trying to save face on this and taking more of a charge on that. And so it's really important to keep up the momentum and letting people know that the overwhelming public opposes this. And that's it from me. Thank you so much.
Huge thank you to Greta for explaining all of that, for the presentation, for fighting to save democracy each and every day. It is a lot, people. I want to focus on something that Greta said at the end. It hasn't passed the U.S. Senate yet. So now is the time to raise our voices, particularly with our 2 U.S. senators. Call their offices once a day or once a week or once every 5 minutes, whatever you have time to do, and tell them to vote no on the SAVE Act, to keep Medicaid, Head Start, and child care, and to not give tax cuts to the very wealthy that are paid for by undercutting our families and our economy. It's a lot to remember, but it's actually not a lot. You could just have a list like, hello, please stop doing bad things to families so you can give billionaires more money. And again, these moments in time where we rise up have been proven to be powerful in the past. We've won in the past. We can win again now, and we win again by sticking together. There's been a couple of questions that we're going to get to in a moment, but can we give a round of applause for Greta? Some hearts, some woo, yay, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so we have some questions that have come into the Q&A. They're really great questions. The first one goes to Amy. Amy, since the budget includes raising the debt ceiling, if the House defeats it, then does that mean that the debt ceiling will not be raised and the government will start defaulting on debt interest payments for Treasury? Or what the heck is going on with the debt ceiling in the middle of all of this, in other words?
That's a really great question. So just to remember, under past administrations, the debt ceiling wasn't even a thing. They just voted, they raised it, they moved on. And so by trying to fold the debt ceiling into the budget bill, they're just trying to exercise more leverage. It doesn't mean they won't have other opportunities to raise the debt ceiling. They could do it as a clean debt ceiling bill without trying to tie other conditions to it. So there are lots of ways that we can raise the debt ceiling, even if this budget bill goes down as we hope it will.
Thank you so much, and such an excellent point. The next question is for Katie, if she's still with us. I know Katie was really busy tonight. Thank you, Katie. Okay, we have a bunch of questions that I'm going to combine together that are specific to you, because Katie has worked in the U.S. Senate, she's worked in presidential administrations, and she's worked in advocacy. So she's seen the full picture of what works and what doesn't work to make a difference. We have a ton of questions in the question area about, does it matter if I call my member of Congress? Is it hopeless? What works best? Is anyone listening on Capitol Hill? And sort of what is the experience from your perspective as both an advocate and a person who has served in presidential administrations and U.S. Senate offices on that question?
I've been in the Senate, but I've talked to a lot of people who have. And I think I would say 100% absolutely. The best thing you can do is call your senators and your member of Congress. You can also, if you don't have time to call, send an email or use one of the platforms like Moms Rising or National Women's Law Center has provided. It's an easy, you can do it on your phone, like while you're waiting at the bus stop or sitting on the floor of your kid's room waiting for them to fall asleep. So if you don't have time to call, you can use one of those platforms. But we have definitely seen Head Start directors reach out to their members of Congress, and they have advocated, sometimes quietly, for the Republican folks. But we've seen money start flowing when Congress gets involved. So our best hope of saving Head Start is definitely getting Congress on the hook, making sure that Congress knows if they touch Head Start, they're going to hear about it, that Head Start's important to their community. And it can't just be the directors and the teachers who are doing the calling. They need everybody in their community to link arms and call with them. So call early and often on Head Start and all these other really important issues.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Greta, Questions for you. People are worried that they might already need a passport to vote and what has happened so far nationally. And you gave a great overview of what you can do in your final slide, but can you give also a perspective on does the calls and does the outreach from constituents matter?
It really matters. I mean, I've been having conversations on the Hill about the SAVE Act with members for 2, 3 months now. And basically, every single member office we enter, they start the conversation by telling us how many of their constituents have called or reached out about this. Because the national conversation can happen, but if they don't think that people in their district care about this, it really is going to influence their vote. We actually flipped 2 House votes this time around on the SAVE Act. Last time there were 5 Democrats who voted for this. This time there were 3, and another one defected, which we can talk about later from Hawaii. But there were 2 members that we got from yeses to no votes, and it was very strictly because their constituents did huge, massive reach out efforts, including voting rights groups in their district. And I also worked in a Hill office, so I know that every single call they get is logged. It might just feel like, you're a tick on somebody's checkbox, but senators get updates on calls every single week. And they usually ask for your zip code too, because they're seeing, what areas of a state or what areas of the district those calls are coming from to really gauge, where people stand on these issues and across a spectrum. And so senators truly get updates on that every single week, what people are calling about, and it really does impact their vote.
And we hear that too. And what's really important is it doesn't just impact the vote of people who are voting to do terrible, awful, very bad things with Head Start, Medicaid, and our voting rights. It's also helpful for your members of Congress who agree with you, who are protecting us and our voting rights, who are protecting Head Start, who are protecting Medicaid, to hear from us too. Because you know what? It's called lobbying for a reason. Members of Congress see other members of Congress in the lobby, in the elevator, and they like to complain to each other. I've seen it happen. And they say, oh, my constituents are blowing up my phone with a bazillion trillion phone calls about the SAVE Act, Medicaid, and Head Start. And I'm so sorry to bug you, other senator who I'm friends with but is not yet on board. We need to do something because my constituents are being mean to me about this. So don't be mean to any member of Congress. We want to be respectful and request that they please vote to protect the SAVE, or not to protect the SAVE Act, to protect Head Start, protect Medicaid, and oppose the SAVE Act, but also just be consistent, because it's our consistency that's powerful. There's a whole bunch of other questions in the chat about how to get engaged, where to get engaged, and all of those things. And we at Moms Rising spend a whole lot of time working with amazing partners who are experts like on this call to figure out where are those fulcrum points of change that we can take action on and make a big difference. And then we email them out to you. We text them out to you. We put them up on the blog out to you. We put them out on social media out to you. We are your one-stop shop for action. And so you don't have to spend so much time sifting through the headlines to see what's actually an emergency and what is, not. And so I would like to give each member of our panel 30 seconds to 1 minute for some closing thoughts about what gives you hope and keeps you in the game. Let's start with Greta.
Thanks. I think even I was having Easter brunch this weekend, and I just keep on running into people and like members of my family who are obviously politically engaged, but they're hearing like conversations in their yoga class or, their poker games and stuff like that about the SAVE Act. And I feel like it happens so rarely in the voting rights space that people are so energized by something. And so even when Senator Ossoff, for example, came out against the bill a couple of weeks ago, he hasn't even voted in the Senate. Like he has no record on this, but there were so many women flooding Facebook comments and Instagram comments, thanking him for taking a stand, but also educating other people. So the Real ID thing that we talked about, the birth certificate thing that we talked about, the senator hasn't even taken a vote on this yet, and yet there are already women doing the public education in the comments, and that is so rare to see. And so it's really inspired me that at a time this hard, when there are so many things going on, so many people have like dug down so deep in this bill and become educators and advocates for it. And I think, it really gets me up and wakes me up every single morning and keeps me going and hearing those conversations. So that's what's getting me through the day. And I just really, truly honored to be here and to see so many of you taking time out of your evenings to focus on these issues when there are so many things going on. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Katie.
So in Head Start and in early childhood, what gives me hope is the amazing early childhood community, the parents, the teachers and staff, the local program administrators, the state and local advocates that are just exhausted, but they still find time to advocate and give this their all. And it makes me feel like those of us who are in Washington, the very least we can do is give it everything that we have to advocate for people and support them in the efforts in their work. So that's what gives me hope. And I truly believe we will prevail because the facts and the people. So
Thank you, Katie. I believe we're going to win too. Amy.
Oh, thanks so much, Kristen. So I'm a little obsessed with taxes along with the fine folks at Moms Rising. And I think what's giving me hope is that, sometimes when you talk to people about the tax code, they're like, it sounds really complicated. It's very wonky. It's very weird. But kind of now more than ever, people are saying, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense it doesn't reflect our values. It doesn't make sense for our economy. And it doesn't make sense to be hurting women and families in order to give more tax cuts to people who may not even notice that they have an extra $60,000 in their bank account. And so that's something that gives me hope, is that people are kind of finding their voice and what taxes mean for them. And it's something that they really feel strongly speaking out about. And so I love being in conversations where I can have that in my ears, along with fighting alongside great partners like Moms Rising and all the folks on the call, to get at the tax code that we really deserve.
100%, 150,000%. Thank you to all of our panelists. We're going to close with some actions. The first action is in the chat. It's about Medicaid cuts. We need people to sign on to tell the Republican leadership in Congress, hands off our Medicaid. Medicaid covers more than 80 billion people. So that's the first one. The second one is really important, Head Start. As you heard, Trump's presidential budget details were leaked for fiscal year 26, including his plan to eliminate Head Start, which is ridiculous. And so we need you to take action and tell Congress, don't do that ridiculous situation. Don't let that happen. The third action is the SAVE Act, telling your senator to vote no on the SAVE Act. We're putting that in the chat as well right now. And we would love you to take action on all of that and then sign on with Moms Rising if you aren't already, and say that you will get engaged with taking one action a week or a day or a minute. No, we don't have that many actions. Don't worry. We know that people are busy. And one of the beautiful things about being a big, bold, powerful movement is we don't have to, every one of us, do every one of the things. But together, we can each do something and build that wave of change that our nation needs to protect our democracy, to build the care infrastructure, and to make it so that we can boost our economy. Because, by the way, all these policies boost our economy and also help families thrive. So thank you so much for being on. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you again to Olivia, Catalina. Thank you so much as well to Murtado and Angie, our interpreters. And thank you to Geronimo, who is our tech person, who is amazing. Thank you to all people for doing all the things, including spending time with us tonight. I love it. We see us stay tough, stay involved. Don't give up. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and we will win. Thank you and good night.